Harrison Smith has restructured his contract, plus a couple of league-wide things that weirdly affect the Vikings. We'll get into all of it here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Ooh-wee!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And today on the show, thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, maybe your first watch of the day if you're watching on YouTube. Let's talk about Harrison Smith and the cap and the extension and all that, or the restructure. It's a small restructure. Harrison Smith restructured his contract, or the Vikings restructured his contract, saving $6 million on the cap this year. He had an $8 million roster bonus that was due this year. So if he's on the roster someday this week, it vests and becomes guaranteed salary, $8 million. So they took that roster bonus and they restructured it over the life of the contract, which means it turns from an $8 million hit this year to $2 million in each of the next 4 years. So it went from $8 million to $2 million this year, saving $6 million of cap this year, and call it a loan. They have to pay off $2 million at a time each of the next 3 years. So that's all really you need to know news-wise. It is a fairly slow news day for the first week of free agency. Fairly slow news day. There was a press conference. The Vikings introduced Harrison Phillips and Jordan Hicks, and the great presser. Not much news in it. There's not like a nugget you need to know. There's nothing to really update you on, but it was pretty fun. So I don't know. I kind of recommend watching it. They're both super charismatic dudes. But the extension of Harrison Smith, the timing of it tells us a little something. I think if you want to match it up with some of the reports and sort of the theory, the speculation that I have on what's going on with Danielle Hunter. Let me explain. So they could have clicked that restructure button with Harrison Smith anytime they wanted. They could have made that cap space a week ago and been more active in free agency or whatever. They could have done that whenever, but they did it now. And I think that timing is important because they had to introduce Harrison Phillips and Jordan Hicks, and they did not have the cap space to do that. They re-signed punter and kicker, and they did the Kirk extension, and they cut Michael Pierce. But after all of that basically brought them to even. So they were under the cap and they were compliant. They didn't have to do anything by the Wednesday deadline of when the new league year actually turns over, but they didn't have any money to actually sign the dudes they had agreed to terms with. So Harrison Phillips and Jordan Hicks didn't actually become Vikings in an official capacity until Thursday. So that's a little awkward. I mean, obviously you shake hands, you say, yeah, we'll sign you to this deal. We got to process a couple things. We'll do it, on Thursday, and that's fine. You can just agree to that. But, you had an introductory press conference coming up, and you can't put a player up on the podium that isn't under contract for you. So that means that they had to make some cap space. And it seemed like the way they wanted to make cap space, if I'm reading the tea leaves a little bit on the way that things have been reported, especially the Ben Gessling report from Wednesday that said they're trying to trade Danielle Hunter, also mentioned they need to make cap space to sign these two guys before their introductory pressers. So that meant that there was a sort of sense of urgency there. We got to make some cap space to do this. And that leads me to believe, I don't know if they wanted to do this Harrison Smith extension. And I think they put it off to the last minute they possibly could, because they would have much rather gotten that cap space via some Danielle Hunter action, be it a restructure, a trade, or an extension, whatever. They probably wanted to make the cap space that way, because that's a move they're going to make anyways. So they're going to make that cap space anyways, but now they needed to make more cap space than they planned on using. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing, right, man? Now they get to be that much more active in free agency or whatever, but then, the drawback is that they've got to pay off money in the next years, and it's going to be harder to cut Harrison Smith if suddenly an age cliff happens and he can't stay healthy and you don't want him on the team anymore, and he's going to be that much more expensive. There's downsides to all of that, right? That's always the give and take. And I think because of those downsides, they would have rather not done it, because it's very clear that Kwesi and to I guess a lesser degree O'Connell and this whole kind of new regime very much values having balanced books. They don't want to have all these debts to pay off and all these dead cap hits coming up and void years. They don't want it. They want to actually get the cap situation under control so they can act like a normal team. And this runs counter to that. And the fact that they waited till the very last second they had to do it is, I think, telling. And what that, so what does that, what like image does that evoke when it comes to Danielle Hunter? If you look at the reporting from Monday and Tuesday, anybody who reported about Danielle Hunter said, yeah, they're working on it. And Doogie said a lot of this, Darren Wolfson at KSCP. Yeah, they're working on an extension. There's some optimism around getting it done, but it's far from a done deal, but it seems like it's going fine. And then on Wednesday, well, they're looking at a trade. So to me, that implies that there is some term of the contract that they just can't agree on, some term of an extension they just can't agree on. Things change. Maybe they'll come back. Somebody will change their mind. Somebody will come down come up with a number, or they'll give way on some language of the contract that they couldn't agree on or something. A lot can happen, but it seemed like, all right, extension didn't get done. Let's go to plan B, which is trading him. And then trading didn't happen in time. So shoot, we got to restructure Harrison Smith so we can get these guys up on the podium, and then we'll go back and maybe we'll see if we can still trade Danielle Hunter, or maybe we go back to the extension thing. But what happens now is that there is a little bit less of a time crunch here. That $18 million roster bonus that makes Danielle Hunter's cap hit so high, which has usually been the subject of all the restructure stuff that I've talked about, that vests fully, which means it becomes fully guaranteed salary on Sunday. So that will happen before the next time we talk. So we got to talk about what happens then. Kind of nothing important. I mean, look, it becomes guaranteed salary. You can't cut Danielle Hunter anymore. That was always kind of an asinine thing. It seemed like in order of preference, this would be the Vikings' preference, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but who cares what I think, right? What the Vikings think is they would, I think, most want to extend him to a true bona fide extension. We're not talking restructure. We're not talking moving money around. We're talking sit down with Danielle Hunter, pay him what he's supposed to be paid, and be done with this. To pull that extension in a world where you kind of can hang, you've missed a lot of games over that negotiation. That can help with your leverage. And, there's been some problems here, but we're a new thing. We're going to do right by you. And, here's the number we think you're worth after factoring the injuries and stuff in. Where if he stays healthy and he plays well next year, that number might have to be higher. So it behooves them to do it now. And I think there's a lot of good reasons to try to do it now, even though I was the one saying, just restructure the contract and then franchise tag him. And you kind of basically have him on a really great 3 years and then he'll be 30. I'd be super excited if they just signed him to a real true extension and he just got to be a Viking till he was old. That would rule. And then for the Vikings, plan B is trading him. But it seems like they have a high enough price, right? Trading him is not cutting him, right? You're getting something back. And that something is not a conditional fifth, right? You're getting something. Yesterday, I said I wouldn't do it for less than 2 first-round picks. I hold fast to that. Call me a homer if you want. I don't care. So extend him would be number 1. Trade him would be number 2. Number 3 would be the restructure that I've been kind of advocating for is third on their list, which is just take that roster bonus, convert it into signing bonus. It spreads out a whole bunch over all the void years. And then you got a big void year problem in 2024. You can franchise tag him then and probably get a reasonable deal there. And then he leaves in 2025, but by then he's 30 and maybe, is he going to be the same athlete? And also 3-4 years from now, you're going to have a much easier time assessing. And then number 4 would be cutting him. And the thing about that is if you can restructure him, you wouldn't cut him. If you prefer to restructure him to cutting him, you'll do that. So I don't think a release is on the table, which means that Sunday's deadline doesn't really matter because guaranteed salary will move to a trading team the same as unguaranteed salary will. And if you trade him to a team, that roster bonus thing is still in effect. The team's not going to trade for him and cut him, right? So whether or not it's guaranteed on Sunday or not, it doesn't really matter if you're trying to trade him. That team is going to be dealing with him having $18 million of guaranteed salary, and they'll convert that into, whatever they want to do with an extension and rework it, do whatever they want with that. But the situation is the same if you trade him today or if you trade him on Tuesday. So it doesn't really affect a trade very much. And it certainly doesn't affect an extension because of the same thing. If you extend Danielle Hunter, now he's on your team by Sunday. The only way it affects the situation is if you don't plan to keep Danielle Hunter on the roster past Sunday. And as I just spent a long time explaining, that's kind of asinine and doesn't really make any sense for anybody. So yeah, whether or not that $18 million is fully guaranteed, I don't think it affects very much, which means the Vikings are in a world where they're not on a deadline at all anymore. And they can just sort of wait this out. And this extension might not get done till May. Who cares? Or maybe a trade gets done in May. Who cares? They might look elsewhere to make cap space. They might do other things with, they might trade a different player. They might do a pay cut with somebody. And, they'll attack free agency how they attack it. Free agency is all sort of held up by Deshaun Watson not picking a team yet. And there's ripple effects with that, right? There's going to be a player that's maybe going to sign with the Saints, but if the Saints end up with Deshaun Watson, they won't be able to sign him, and then that player might sign with, the Dolphins. So the Dolphins are waiting on that to make a move, and another player will be waiting on the Dolphins to make that move, and that player's waiting on the Packers, and the Packers are waiting on that. So like that, it'll all ripple, right? So the whole league is sort of sitting there watching to see what happens with Deshaun Watson, and then I think a lot of little dominoes will fall. And so the fact that has taken a while has also made this take away. But let me talk to you about it taking a long time, because we have struggled, I think, as a community with our patience. And so let me talk to you about that. We'll talk to you a little bit about some other league-wide things. The Davante Adams trade has a bit of an impact on the Vikings. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Za'Darius Smith. We'll talk about they actually went and met with a restricted free agent for the Bills, and I'll explain to you how all that worked. So we'll get into all of that. First things first, though, let me talk to you about Grambling. What an interesting day of March Madness it was on Thursday. There was a really squirrely game with Gonzaga, and if you use BetOnline's live betting apparatus, you could have gone in at halftime of that game, Gonzaga versus Georgia State, and Georgia State 16 seed versus the 1 seed, and the 16 seed was kind of hanging tough for a while in that game. And if you didn't buy it, and I kind of didn't buy it, and I wish I had done this on BetOnline and I didn't, but if you didn't buy it, you could have gone onto their live betting apparatus and you could have been like, Gonzaga's going to take this. That spread probably went down close to like Gonzaga minus 10, and they ended up winning by almost 20. So that is the kind of thing, or maybe more than 20. That is the kind of thing you can do. The power of the live betting apparatus. You can also do a bunch of like player prop parlay stuff with their props builder, and you don't have to just bet on college basketball. You can bet on football futures. You can, I think probably soon, bet on NFC North futures as the division develops. You can bet on baseball futures. You can bet on pro basketball, pro hockey. Playoffs are starting up soon for those leagues. Whatever you want, even your favorite Vegas casino game. So head on over to betonline.net. Get yourself a Grambling at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's catch up on a couple of other things. The other thing the Vikings were up to on Thursday, in addition to restructuring Harrison Smith and running a press conference, was they met with Ryan Bates, who is an offensive lineman, an interior offensive lineman for the Buffalo Bills. He ended up actually overtaking John Feliciano by playoff time, and he wasn't supposed to do that. He kind of overperformed and might actually be kind of a diamond hidden in the rough, but he's a restricted free agent. Restricted free agency is a bit of a different thing. Didn't come up for the Vikings this year, but it came up for the Bills. They placed the right of first refusal tender on him, and that's because Ryan Bates is an undrafted free agent, which means there's no draft pick compensation stuff that can sometimes happen in these situations. But what that basically means is that the Vikings can offer Ryan Bates whatever deal they want with a certain minimum. I think it's like a $4 million-ish. So anything $4 million, but they could offer him a 10-year, $100 million deal if they wanted to. Whatever deal they offer, the Bills have a chance to match. They can say, if the Vikings say, we'll give you $10 million a year, the Bills can say, no, we'll give him $10 million a year. They match, and then that contract gets signed, and the Bills keep him. So the Bills have right of first refusal. But if the Vikings offer him so much money that the Bills say, too rich for my blood, I'm out, then he becomes a Viking. And they met with Ryan Bates on this premise on Thursday. In some cases, if you slap, say, a second round tender on a guy, it's the same process, but if he ended up being a Viking, the Vikings would have to trade a second round pick back. None of that this time, but that's how the restricted free agency works. The thing about it is the Bills just signed Roger Saffold And that would be the replacement for Ryan. Ryan Bates wouldn't start for the Bills, and he would probably start for the Vikings. So this creates a world where the Vikings value Ryan Bates more than the Bills do, and therefore would be justified in offering him more money. So this could be a thing that happens. I won't go into Ryan Bates's like tape study and stuff until he's actually assigned Vikings. So maybe we'll talk about that next week if it happens, but something to keep an eye on there. Elsewhere in the league, Za'Darius Smith, who was supposed to join the Ravens, balked for whatever reason on the deal. I don't really know what happened there, but he had agreed to terms with the Ravens, and he reversed course and goes back into free agency. And now he's negotiating with a whole bunch of teams, and according to Ian Rappaport, the Vikings are one of them. So the Vikings are seriously negotiating with Za'Darius Smith. There's a bunch of teams still in that bidding war, though. It'll be a difficult bidding war to win, but the Vikings could win it, and that would mean Za'Darius Smith joins the Vikings. That would be insane. I don't know what happened with the Ravens there, though, but I know the Cowboys are also in on it, and a couple of other teams that I don't think were named, but Cowboys and Vikings were. So that's something insane. I should also probably mention the Davante Adams trade. Look, this is not Vikings news. It's Packers news. Go listen to Locked On Packers if you want to learn more about it. Or Locked On Raiders, I guess, maybe you can stomach a little easier. But the trade is for a first round and a second round pick next year. The Raiders get Davante Adams. That's it. Simple enough trade. But that means that the wide receiver core, the wide receiver rooms in the NFC North outside of the Vikings are in a really weird, bad place. The Lions don't have very many guys. The Bears have like Darnell Mooney and a bunch of guys worse than him. And the Packers are now down to like nobody. Like, I don't even know who plays for the Packers. And they're probably going to get somebody. Apparently they might be in for Julio Jones, or maybe that was just Packers fans pining for him. I don't know. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. And Aaron Rodgers apparently signed with the Packers knowing that. He already knew that Davante Adams was out. And so he decided to go back to Green Bay with that knowledge in mind. So, that's all. Neither here nor there. But the point is, because we know that there are 6 games against poor wide receiver cores, that might make you tempted to think, corners don't matter as much to the Vikings anymore. Good thing, because they have a horrible corner room right now, and it needs a lot of work. They probably need to sign 2 or 3 free agents and draft 2 corners to have a prayer at having a good corner room. And that's a lot of resources with other needs on the roster too. So that's rough. But because the rest of the division, that's 6 games of the year that you're not going to be up against a very strong wide receiver group unless somebody else signs some free agents, which still might totally happen. But also, look, there's 11 other games in the season, ideally more, right? Because that would, postseason games, maybe some more if we can swing that. But so there's other games in the season against other teams that have strong wide receiver cores. And also, even a bad wide receiver core can still light you up if you suck. This has happened to the Vikings like last year a lot. So I kind of balk at the idea that, corners won't matter. Look, some of it's just funny jokes, and go make your funny jokes, but don't actually think that the corners don't matter because the wide receivers in the division are bad. So that's a little bit of odds and ends. The last thing that I want to talk to you about, we'll get into it here soon, is about how slowly free agency has gone and how to cope with that and what that means to the Vikings. And let's talk a little bit about procrastination. But first things first, look, we all wake up sometimes, middle of the night, you got a sweet craving, turn to a Built Bar, reach for a Built Bar. Don't knock yourself off the wagon by going and reaching for one of these sugary, 30 grams of sugar, 300 calorie candy bars. Why don't you get something that tastes just like it, but only has 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar, and then 17 grams of protein. Even their Built Puffs, which are basically marshmallow covered in chocolate, which who doesn't love that? And they come in flavors like key lime pie and cinnamon churro. That's same stats, more or less, same protein content, calories and all that. But it's like you're eating a marshmallow bar, which who doesn't love that? There's also all their main series flavors like chocolate orange, chocolate mint, cookies and cream, chocolate caramel, all that stuff. So head on over to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you can get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off, all one word, at built.com. All right, so it's the end of the first week of free agency. I'm going to venture a guess that you might be a little disappointed in how active the Vikings have been. This kind of happens every year. Happened a lot with Rick Spielman. Seems like it's going to keep happening with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. They just don't get in on the big deals. And a lot of teams just don't do it. And I think those teams are kind of right. I kind of would rather be in this position than like where the Jaguars are right now, where they've gone and spent a bunch of really stupid money. But let's talk a little bit about procrastination. And I'm going to invoke the wisdom of the great Bud Grant, who's still in New York, by the way. Never make a move until you absolutely have to. I don't know if any of y'all play poker or other or like trading card games, if you really want to get nerdy about it, that sort of follow the same logic, but I'll go with poker. In poker, if you talk to any pro poker player, they will tell you that, hey, look, if it's all the same, I am going to wait until the river to make a big bet and not make that big bet on the flop. If it's all the same, of course, there's reasons to make a bet on the flop if you don't feel very confident about what's going to happen next. But if it's all the same, they want to wait as long as possible before they make a decision. Maybe let me put this another way. They want to be the big blind because the big blind goes last. And the big blind, that means you get to wait until everybody else has done everything before you decide what to do. Essentially, it's an information gathering strategy. I want to make a decision with as much information available to me as possible, and therefore I'm going to wait until the last possible moment. And so that brings me kind of back around to the Harrison Smith restructure. They waited until the last possible moment. Again, they could have done that 2 weeks ago. There's nothing stopping them from doing it. They could have done that 2 weeks ago to make some cap space to be more active in the tampering window. But what if they could have gone through the whole offseason and never done that restructure? And they could have paid off all that money and not had extra cap charges down the road and had more cap flexibility. They've now had to sacrifice some of that because of the timing of the way that Danielle Hunter stuff has worked out. They would have preferred not to do that. So if they did that, 2 weeks ago, they're guaranteeing that they pay this cost in cap flexibility. They didn't know whether or not Danielle Hunter would get done in time. So you might as well wait to the last minute and see if Danielle Hunter gets done in time. And if he doesn't, push the button, 1 second before the clock hits zero, and it's all the same. Doesn't change anything. Because that's not cap space they were planning on having. So now they have more cap space. But when I see a lot of impatience, what are they doing? Come on, wake up, Vikings, do something. And I always am going to be advocating patience. I just think patience is key here. That doesn't mean we can't evaluate what they've done so far. And I've said it on this show, said it a ton on Twitter too. I'm not a big fan so far. I mean, of course, I don't like the Kirk extension. Y'all knew that about me. But I also am kind of underwhelmed by Harrison Phillips and Jordan Hicks. I think they're positive moves. I think they're efficient deals. I think they're good signings, but they don't move the needle all that much for me. And the rest of it's kind of small potatoes. So I'm waiting to see something that really gets me excited. And I'm a little disappointed so far. And I feel like I can have that opinion while also acknowledging if something else happens, that opinion will change. But the idea is that something else will happen. They will make more cap space. Something's going to happen to this Danielle Hunter contract, and every single one of these options saves the Vikings cap space. That cap space will go to something. And something might even happen with all the other contracts like Kendricks and Thielen and whoever else. I guess those are the only two left, right? Because Harrison Smith happened, Michael Pierce happened. I think that's it. But, more cap space is going to be made, and that will be spent on someone. Who that will be spent on, I'm not sure, but that kind of leads me to the next thing, because what you're probably thinking in your head is like, well, yeah, but all the good free agents are gone now. So why did they wait and miss out on everybody? What are they doing? Let's get, and you get the sense of urgency. Everybody gets really antsy. And here's the deal. That's not true. I mean, if you look at the free agent lists that are named, there's tons of awesome names out there that are super exciting. I'm not going to name any because I don't want you to get attached to specific names. Like, look, they need cornerbacks. They're going to sign someone. They're not going to run into the draft with Cam Dantzler and Chris Boyd starting at quarterback. That's asinine. If they do, we can criticize that, but let's wait till that actually let's criticize that when it happens, right? But by and large, they're signing a cornerback, and there are cornerbacks on the market that are exciting. Go look up any free agent list. There might be names you aren't familiar with, but that doesn't mean those guys aren't good players. That just means you haven't had a reason to pay attention to their AFC team or whatever, which is totally fair. The thing is, teams have wider boards than you do. I'm sorry. They do this, 16 hours a day. They just have considered more people than you. So when you look at the free agency list and you go, oh, God, there's like 2 names on here I'm really familiar with that I'm excited about, and everybody else seems kind of either I don't know them or their name doesn't pop out to me or whatever. That's just something that kind of happens in our brain unless we're sitting here studying this 14 hours a day like a team is. We're just not going to be as familiar. They are going to have opinions that are like more in depth than ours. They have considered more guys than you, which means the free agency class to them is deeper than you think it is, which means to them, all the good free agents aren't gone. To them, all the overpriced free agents are gone that we probably wouldn't have been into anyways. That's the way the team seems to be thinking about this. Very similar to the way Rick Spielman thought about this. It should feel pretty familiar to you. But again, waiting seems like a decent idea. And, throw in a bid for whatever, right? They threw in a bid for Darius Williams. The Jaguars outbid him, whatever that happens, and it's free to throw in a bid. But because, that was the bid they threw into Darius Williams was what they were willing to pay for Darius Williams. And the Jags were willing to pay more. And the Vikings thought, that would be too expensive. That would be an overpay to us. We decide not to do it. And that is a decision that should be judged on its merit. There are some players that I think they could have kept. For example, Michael Pierce went and signed a deal with the Ravens that's lower now than the one the Vikings signed Harrison Phillips for. It sounds like the Vikings offered Michael Pierce a pretty low pay cut, and he said, nah, I don't want to do that. And they actually brought up their amount eventually at some point in the negotiation, but by then it was kind of over. But it seems like if the Vikings wanted to, assuming that Michael Pierce would take the same deal with the Ravens assuming he would take that same deal with the Vikings, which because of the scheme fit stuff we talked about the other day might not be true. So the writing might have been on the wall here, and this is a divorce, and now let's welcome in Harrison Phillips, who again, you're going to fall in love with him. Go watch a press conference. You're going to be over this. But that's one example of something. Or, hey, maybe they could have gone and signed this guy or that guy. I kind of thought the original Za'Darius Smith contract that he signed with the Ravens, I was like, man, kind of wish the Vikings found a way to do that. Darn. But they're going to sign someone. And when we find out who that person is, if that person is a total nobody and we're like, ugh, God, that sucks, we'll say that then. But we don't have to have the take ahead of time. Wait until the last possible moment. It's all we can really do. So I just want to advocate a little bit of patience. We're in the long game now. The initial flurry of all these deals is over, and you might not want your favorite team to be involved in that because some of those deals are really inefficient and they kind of have a really bad hit rate, and they might not be that good of an idea. As much as we want to be excited about the team and we want all these new fresh toys, might not be a responsible thing to do. But we're in the long game now. The only meaningful deadline doesn't actually change the dynamic in any way, and that's the Danielle Hunter roster bonus vesting on Sunday, and it kind of doesn't change anything. And then it's the next deadline is like the draft. So they can sit on their hands and wait and draw this out and use drawing it out as a negotiating tactic to make other players, say, hey, if we cut you now, the market's going to be totally dead. And you can sort of use that as a negotiation tactic and things will move. But this is not going to be the kind of thing where we're refreshing Twitter every 2 seconds. It's that time is over. News will still keep breaking and stuff. But the flurry of it all is, I think, about to really wind down here. And then we're in the long game. And then the dynamic changes. So I'm going to transition a lot stronger into draft season after this week. We'll keep, of course, covering news as it comes up, but we're kind of in draft season now, and not too long from now, the Vikings will also transition into draft season, and we'll pick it up from there. So next week we'll talk. In the meantime, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. You'll probably be ahead of where I am if you've been listening to that. They're doing a great job over there. I will see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.